Last week, Bitterroot and the South Seattle Emerald co-published the story From Sioux to Seattle, Does a Wealthy City Owe Its First Residents Reparations? And I'm very excited to welcome everyone here for this very important discussion furthering that story. We're centering Native voices of those that live here in Seattle, and we're here to respectfully engage in a dialogue around this topic. I'm just going to introduce our panelists very quickly here. Marcus Harrison Green is down at the end there. Marcus is the publisher of the South Seattle Emerald, and he wrote the story that inspired this event tonight. Next to Marcus, we have Russell Brooks. Russell Brooks is a Southern Cheyenne tribal member and the executive director of Red Eagle Soaring Native Youth Theater here in Seattle. Next is Fern Renville, a member of Sisseton Wahpeton Tribe and the CEO of SNAG Productions. Then we have Rachel Heaton. Rachel is a member of the Muckleshoot Tribe and the co-founder of Mazaska Talks. And to my right here is Robin Littlewing Sigo. Robin is a tribal council member of the Suquamish Tribe. And we have a lot to talk about tonight. But before we get started, we just want to remind the audience that first and foremost, all of these fine folks on stage represent just a small sampling of the vast diversity of the Indigenous experience here in Seattle and across our region. There are many area tribes that call this region home, and many Native Americans who live in Seattle whose tribal homelands are elsewhere. Bearing all of that in mind, we'll be focusing this discussion broadly on visions for the future, ideas of how the city of Seattle, other local governments, and citizens can best recognize our Indigenous roots and residents. And we'll explore some of the diversity of perspectives on this idea of Native reparations. This is a learning and sharing experience for all of us, and I'm really glad that we're all here together to do this. So let's dive in. We wanted to talk about land acknowledgements first, and we heard one just here from the executive director at Town Hall. They give a land acknowledgement before all events here, as do many other programs around town. Donnie Stevenson, a tribal council member of the Muckleshoot Tribe, told our writer Marcus for this story, "How many of Seattle's new tech workers know about the first peoples of this land? The only way we can grow from our history and trauma is through communication, education, and collaboration." He also said, "There's a degree of power we find in acknowledgements, and that can be profound, but they're also often historical." So we heard a land acknowledgement here. We've heard Donnie's words. They've become quite common here in Seattle. Are these a good first step toward opening a discussion of reparations and recognition for Native people? And any thoughts on how they can be helpful or how they can go wrong? And any ideas on other modes of education that are helpful as well? Rachel, I know that you talk a lot about land acknowledgements. Do you want to jump in here?
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. I think, well, like Marcus and I discussed when we did the article, like it's not just a black and white conversation. It's not just a simple, let's come and acknowledge where we are. There's a lot of history that comes with this land, and also the acknowledgement of treaties. And just like our councilman, brought up the fact about how many people know, the land that you're on. But it's not just knowing the land that you're on, it's knowing the people of this land and understanding the tribes that fall under the treaties here. And I know sometimes it's easy to come and just hear about one particular tribe and kind of like what we heard tonight, we mentioned, the Duwamish, but then I think that's a part of like, land acknowledgement is about understanding the history. It's not just about understanding the city that you live in, but what about before? What was before the city was here? Who are the people that were here? What was the living? What was the life? And the thing is we can talk in past tense, but the reality is that we're still here. We're still living. We're still, you know, having to be assimilated into these systems. And so I think when we talk about land acknowledgement, it's really an understanding of the history. Before we can unfold the history, we have to know the history. And I think that it's important that we continue to educate not just the people that live here, but even educating our Native people. And so I think it's an unfolding of different layers of education. And I think that this is a start. I think by having these conversations and opening it up for questions and understanding. So.
And I think that one of the things that Rachel pointed out was that it's not a black and white issue. Therefore, you can't check a box for this. So having a blanket statement works because I'm so happy that people get to hear that. Because growing up, you know, it wasn't until I was 40 that I actually went to someplace and actually heard a land recognition in a non-Indigenous space. And that was a really wonderful moment for me. I don't even remember which tribe they were recognizing the land for, just that they were talking about Indigenous land, that this is all Indigenous land was important. But the piece that we need to really take home from that, and the piece that I want to make sure gets across here, is that it's not just a checklist. We can't just keep going down this list and say, this is the one that we're going to use, recognizing that that there are other tribes here as well. There's other people here as well, and that I, as a Suquamish councilwoman, represent a lot of Duwamish people as well, and that this area and Muckleshoot as well, we have worked really hard to maintain some of those or those relationships. And so just doing something where you're donating money, like, oh, I feel bad, so I'm going to donate money for rent for people in Seattle, doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting the whole point of it. You want to do that breadth of it. Find Native nonprofits, give them money, go and visit things. This is the way to really acknowledge the land that you're truly standing on, that you're living on.
Russell, I know you were involved in some school curriculum that's been changed here. How do you define that difference in land acknowledgement as a source of education versus educating our children in our schools as well about Native land and Native culture?
Well, obviously, there's a reason that Senate Bill 5433 was passed and is mandated. A lot of reasons why that took place, and it's still very new. You know, it's still very uncharted waters, trying to find out really what that should look like. It makes sense as far as land acknowledgement because if you look at society as a whole, you look at our generations of young people that are coming up, Native or non-Native, are all coming up through public schools in the area, you know, with the exception of tribal schools, but the vast majority of our youth are coming up through these school systems. And Native history in general has been grossly left by the wayside, even portrayed inaccurately with what little it's even been addressed in our school systems to begin with. And that's not just here, that's everywhere. That's everywhere across this continent. And so with that, I think that's a good starting point for our if we're going to make some large, you know, wide sweeping change that we envision, this world that we envision living in one day, or at least you know, our children or our grandchildren living in this world that we imagine one day. I think a really key component of proper land acknowledgement and as you alluded to, like the history of an area, and also really establishing, especially in schools where there's not a large Native presence, but getting young people to understand that this land is still vibrant. It's still inhabited by the original peoples of this land that are still here adapting and are still surviving and also thriving in ways as well. And they need to understand that and respect that. And they need to have a baseline understanding of that. And the perfect place to start is in the public school systems. If we're expecting proper land acknowledgement to actually become, a thing, over a large area. So that's there's a lot. I have a lot of youth experience working with youth. I think it also starts with our own youth. I know one of my friends a long time ago had coined it cultural amnesia. If you think of the term amnesia, what took place historically to our Native people. And again, I'll say this for a lot of, for the people in the audience that may not know a lot about Native people, we're, on the surface, there's a lot of things that connect us that we have in common. But when you go deeper below that surface, our cultures are very diverse within our tribes. Our languages are different, our cultures are different, our histories are different to a degree in certain ways. And it's, that being said, it's so important that, if you're looking at it on a local level, like we really need to defer to you all for the answers to what we need to know about the people of this place and of this land, both Native and non-Native. You absolutely have to have the tribal leaders of this area at the table to have that discussion and to outline those measures. Again, it's it's something that it starts with our own communities. We always try to look within our own communities too. When you the term amnesia, when you get hit on the head, and you can't remember, what happened or where you're at and stuff. That happened to a lot of generations of our people, and a lot of people know about the boarding school experience. That was a big part of that, and so I think it's really important that that we connect our youth here in the area back, with the tribes of this area, and for them to be able to really take the lead for all of us in doing that, so that we can have proper land acknowledgements and that we can find a way to put that out through the public school systems and Senate Bill 5433 with since time immemorial. It's a start, but there's still so much work to be done. And we may not even see that in our lifetime, the full measure of that. But it's important to continue it. So.
Yeah. Well, that leads into another question that I had about here in Seattle. Area tribes have been fairly successful at influencing culture and government in many ways, from cleaning up waterways to pushing for dam removals. The city also has Salish art represented throughout town, and just recently opened a housing specifically for Native residents experiencing homelessness. Compared with other cities where you may have lived or visited, how would you assess Seattle's success at acknowledging its Native population up to now? And are things moving in the right direction? And what would you like to see next? Both from an official city capacity, but also from its citizens and from the culture and perhaps arts and education in general. Fern, go ahead. You look like you have something to say.
Is this on? It is on. Pardon me. I'm a member of the Sistenuapitan Sioux Tribe from South Dakota. So I am a guest on these lands, on these Coast Salish lands. And so, like Russell, I don't feel qualified to speak around certain issues, but I will say that I am a stakeholder as a dual citizen. In my Sioux Nation, I'm a stakeholder in the 1855 Fort Laramie Treaty. But as an American citizen, I'm also a stakeholder in that treaty. Those treaties don't concern just Native citizens. They apply to everyone. They're governing documents that establish parameters that we're all affected by. So treaties are not just for Indians. They're your treaties too. So the whole reason this panel came about is that a black playwright named Darren Kennedy wrote a play called Reparations that is right now at Langston Hughes. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I really hope that you can. It is a little hop into the future in which the cast tells the story about reparations for the descendants of slaves. And so, without telling you any spoilers, Sound Theater, which is producing it, is also producing a play that I am writing with my partner, Roger Fernandez, that is also a futuristic story where we're going forward into the future of Seattle. And there is so much trauma right now. There is so much challenge to our solidarity. The Indian termination effort seems to have started anew. I know this is called reparations, but I will say that today in the there was a hearing around ICWA. Do you guys know what that is? So Indian Child Welfare, which is critical to reestablishing the connections that were severed explicitly and intentionally by the federal government's boarding school program. So I looked up the definition of reparations, and it describes making amends for something that is done in the past tense. So insofar as that term applies to natives, I think we actually have to come up with a new term. Because today in court, our leaders are fighting to hang on to the rights that we have won. Now, I'm fairly confident, because I will say something about all of those treaties, is they have withstood every legal challenge. So, if you look at the endurance and longevity and then potential to be fully supported and leveraged of Native treaty rights, you're looking at like something that's radically transformative. So, in writing a play about the future, it's really kind of a selfish thing. I wanted to give myself a little fantasy wish fulfillment, to give myself the sustenance I need to like get through right now. And I'm approaching it through a mythic story because Native myths are timeless. They move through time. So I am trying to actually remove the bounds of what is practical and likely and possible, and just let my imagination run free. And it's been remarkable how difficult that is for me. I have PTSD. I grew up on a reservation. I have been conditioned by my lived experience as a Native person to plan for disaster. And it's funny because I know the whole country is traumatized right now. And I'm kind of like, welcome to our world. This doesn't go away for us, ever. So this is a taste of the kind of struggle that marginalized people experience. And it really does give you a taste of the very real impacts on all aspects of our well-being that comes out of oppression and literally being targeted by genocidal campaigns. So, so that's where I'm going. That's where this play is going to go. But I will tell you this. The most highly surveilled Americans are Native activists for tribal sovereignty. And there's a very, very good reason. And that is that there is no greater tool than tribal sovereignty to fight for our Mother Earth right now. There's no greater tool. And if you look around the Northwest, you will see clearly that tribal people have established this ethos of caring for the environment. The only reason salmon are not extinct is because of people like Billy Frank Jr. fighting for the right of Native people to have traditional access to land. We also live in a city where our local Indian Center, the Daybreak Star Indian Cultural Center, was established by a group of urban Indian activists in 1970 who used the Fort Laramie Treaty to occupy it. The Fort Laramie Treaty, which is my treaty and your treaty, says that all decommissioned federal lands must first be offered up to Sioux Nations or our proxies. So we can say, Russell, go in there and get that for us. As you can imagine, the federal channels weren't receptive to that at first. But those young people who did that, those young people who took over at Alcatraz, so those 18, 19, 21-year-olds, one of them was my auntie. She was 18 years old, and she was just a new college student who ended up being relocated through the Termination Era's relocation program. And those young people had no idea what would happen if they went and spent the night on Alcatraz and claimed it. That was like right before Kent State, and that was the kind of tension that was in the air. And the only reason the Coast Guard and the military didn't come in hardcore was because those young people also had a really badass lawyer with them who showed that those young people had an absolutely ironclad right to be there. So those treaties are powerful. They've never been fully leveraged or supported. No one knows a darn thing about them. My brother is an Indian lawyer who works in Montana. And he's like, even Indian lawyers don't know about Indian law because we're really literally kind of making it up as we go along. I'm regularly stunned by what our elected leaders in Congress don't know about the basic foundations of this nation. And I'm sorry, I know I'm blathering on, but I just also want to say, we live in a country that our our government, our democratic form of government, is directly modeled on the Iroquois Law of Peace. I don't know if you remember in 1989 when Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii got Congress to pass a resolution acknowledging the debt of the United States to the Iroquois Law of Peace. And so the colonists who came here didn't have any experience with democracy. All they knew was monarchy. So they arrived and they saw the Seneca, those eastern communities, female-led representative communities with an idea of everyone has a say. That was radical. And all of those quote-unquote founding fathers, there's plenty of archival stuff, you can go find it, the stuff they wrote about it. They were deeply influenced. So our very model of government owes its debt, its very existence, to this indigenous idea. How could we redefine reparations? And from my perspective, as a Dakota person, is we would really leverage and support those treaties for the first time ever. For the first time ever, we would support treaty rights and help tribes to continue being the cutting edge of just about everything. All of the most cutting edge fish science in the Northwest is funded and sourced by tribes. Tribes are doing the work of protecting Mother Earth and doing a really great job. So we can support literally the most effective, high impact solutions already on the ground. People who already know, because they've lived here for thousands of years, how to live in this place. And I will also say that the land acknowledgement is a wonderful start, and it is just and it's a work in progress for everyone. It also does tie in beautifully with the since time immemorial curriculum, which is all about those treaties. So it's a wonderful practice for linking that and giving people access to that curriculum. And,
Absolutely.
yeah, so, okay.
Rachel or Robin, did you have anything to add about? Please. Do you have anything to add about thoughts on what you hope Seattle area governments and people do to acknowledge its Native population?
I've been on the Suquamish Tribal Council for 7 years now, and one of the first meetings that I had was a government-to-government meeting with the city of Seattle. And so we have met with all of the different mayors that have been there since then. We've talked about the waterfront project. We look at things, one of my auntie's favorite things is to bring us up to Westlake Center area, and if you look at the brickwork on the ground, it's a Coast Salish basket weave pattern. And you don't even know you're walking on it, but my kids know they're walking on it because I say it every single time, because my aunt said it every single time, my dad said it every time. And that there are those pieces that happen because of this government-to-government relationship. The piece where people don't quite understand what sovereignty is, but they definitely understand like what personal space is, what ownership is of your house. And if somebody barges into your house, you're going to know that they're not invited. One of the major parts of our canoe journeys is you'll see people all wrapped up in the hot, or rafted up all in the hot sun. And rafted up is when you have all the canoes all together and they're waiting out there on the water. They're hungry, they're tired, they're ready to come and eat and rest. But they're waiting there because an important piece of it is asking permission to come ashore. Asking permission to come ashore. Stating what your intentions are, what you're going to do there. And then the chairperson of that tribe, the elders of that tribe, the youth of that tribe invite people to come ashore. They invite them to be there. And one of the things that's really important for our tribe, and we have a curriculum called Healing of the Canoe that some other tribes are also utilizing, and we talk about body sovereignty, and we talk about that idea of consent and what that means. And asking people to come ashore. Who do you want to ask into your life? What if people were really honest about those intentions of what they're thinking about when they come in? And that's how we start these meetings when we're having government-to-government relationships. And we also have attorneys. I mean, it was like Fern said, having that attorney made a difference. Us having money makes a difference. Us having casino revenue makes a difference. Marijuana revenue, all of these things, finding new tax bases, those are things that sovereign government gets to do. But we get held to a higher standard than those other ones, right? It's like, well, what are you doing for the community? And nobody goes and asks Jeff Bezos, what are you doing? I mean, Seattle is actually really good at asking Jeff Bezos what he's doing. But that's what we need to do. Like, we shouldn't be held to this higher standard, but we hold ourselves to that because of that. Because despite all of these things, all of these traumas that have happened, these are important to us. And so that interaction, so yes, I think that the city of Seattle is doing a better job, and I think that there's more to be done. Side note, real quick, is one of the recent things that I really felt very triggered by, and I don't use that term lightly because I was a mental health counselor for a number of years, is when the viaduct went down, there were so many posts and people were so sad about that viaduct being gone. I mean, suddenly people who'd hated the viaduct were like, oh my gosh, the viaduct's gone. I'm not going to see this beautiful view. It's historic. It's part of our culture. And I'm like, oh, white people, no. This is like 40, 50 years old. This is not historical. This is not, you're nostalgic for it. I get that. You have memories here. I get that. But trying to put it in context of what does destruction look like and what does that feel like? Like if you're feeling that about something that's unsafe and something that, if there's an earthquake, it's going down and you're having those feelings about it, I really need you to channel those into thinking about what other communities of color are dealing with. And so that's one of the things that I think that we can all do, and we can really think about what it is that we're saying. What do those things mean to us? What do these small things mean to us? And what would it mean if it were something bigger?
Rachel, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I think one great thing that the city of Seattle does have resting on the city is the fact that we have 29 federally recognized tribes here in the state of Washington. And so I think that gives more of a bird's eye view when we think about the diversity, when we talk about a lot of the activism and things that go on. Seattle's really paid attention to in a lot of ways. And so I also think that Seattle has grasped that, that image, the fact that when things do happen here, that other parts of the nation or other parts of the world are watching what happens here. And so I think that's really started changing a lot of the conversation that happens. And so here it is getting back to, like, if we're just talking about reparations, if we're talking about just getting back to just a basic foundation, it is the treaties. It is getting back to just acknowledging that government to government relation, that document that actually governs our lands and basically gives us that sovereign right to do what we need to do. And so we've run into these issues where we've wanted to exercise our sovereignty, and because of corporate greed and capitalism and all of the issues that we run into, we had this simple divestment from, Wells Fargo, which was $3 billion, which was it was the first one in the nation for us to divest from a Wall Street bank. But then in turn, we had nowhere to put our funds. And so this is that Natives just getting that buying power, just having that seat at the table, just now having that opportunity to have this conversation of just, a lot of people don't recognize like that in the treaties here, Suquamish has a tie here, Muckleshoot has a tie here, Tulalip has ties here. There's so many things, but unless you start bringing us to these tables and having these conversations, a lot of people don't understand that. And so sadly, these conversations are happening in my children's generation, in our generation now. So these aren't conversations that have been happening for 50, 60 years. They're just now unfolding. And so when we talk about just getting to a basic, it's just like, let's sit down and what does the treaty say? What do the treaties say? And that's just a starting point. And so just think of how much work needs to be done beyond that when we talk about what this work looks like and how it is not just a simple, it's not just a simple group of people that you're, that you're repatriating. It's not just a simple group of people, that you're giving back to. There's so much history that comes with this. And I think Seattle has a platform that a lot of cities don't have because of the number of urban natives and native communities that have homes here. And so, so I think Seattle is starting that groundwork, but I definitely think there is so much work that needs to be done. So.
Yeah, thank you. Russell, do you have something?
I definitely have to agree with that. Of course, I've lived both in the city and on a reservation and worked both, and come from an area of the country where the largest population other than white is native. But coming to Seattle and being here for a number of years, and again, it's like you said, it's only the beginning of the work that needs to be done. But you kind of pick up on what goes on around here in Seattle. I think Seattleites and people in the area tend to like to consider themselves woke, like kind of this woke population that's, on the, keeping it real and, that kind of thing. Well, to her point, I mean, if we're going to do that, yeah, the treaties are the starting point. But I think the fact that, I mean, we're even up here on this stage having this discussion is huge, because there are other parts of the country where Native people are still struggling to even be just recognized, not treated as invisible, not stuck in the past, like people thinking like, or a thing of the past, or you still live in teepees, or, that type of thing. And there's that type of ignorance out there. I mean, it's prevalent. It's all over the place. So yeah, this is a good starting point for sure. And I think Seattle has a really amazing opportunity to get it right, and to also teach the coming generations in a way that really honors Native people of this land and Native people in general. I think Seattle can really be a beacon to that, and it's, and again, it can be an example to the rest of the country and other places where Native people have long been overdue in trying to see their rights and their visibility and their honor and acknowledgement realized with the greater public.
Yeah. Marcus, I wanted to bring you in. Your work at the Emerald lifts up the voices of people of color in Seattle, and you've been a lifelong Seattleite. How do you feel like communities of color in Seattle, who have all been affected by similar issues of gentrification and erasure, can work to support Native American recognition as well?
I guess just more so speaking as a publisher of an organization that is PLC-centric, I think it's being cognizant of the fact that you are telling a three-dimensional story and you're telling a consistent story. When I first started to write this story, I was very aware that I didn't want this to be seen as, trauma porn or anything like that. It's, as everybody that I essentially talked to was like, it seems like there's this pendulum swing of stereotypes, right? That we're either seen as, this very noble princess or so forth, or we're seen in this light of, very derogatory, savage or so forth. And the thing is that you have to learn that the opposite of tragedy isn't, Care Bear positivity or what have you. The opposite of tragedy is nuance and complexity and layering and texture. And so I think in terms of being a journalist of color, it's the onus is on you to understand sort of those power dynamics, understand that history, understand that, when I went to go talk to Fern and Russell and Rachel, they didn't elect me to come and speak with them and tell their story, right? All they knew was that I was personable and, devilishly handsome. And right. So I mean, I think we have that onus to make sure that we are providing a platform that other people, can't, and that you're not just checking a box that, it's Native American Heritage Month in, November, so we need to tell this story. It's like, no, these are stories that need to be told at all times, specifically in this day and age where, and in a city which is what I think the 5th whitest metropolitan city, where it maps out that 75% of white folks have exclusively white social circles. So the only time that they're ever going to engage a lot of times with people of color or be exposed to people of color is through our media. And so we have the onus to continue to do that out of necessity in terms of telling these stories.
Thank you. tonight, we have Deborah Juarez, who's a member of the Blackfeet tribe, and she's the first Native American city council member here in Seattle. Regionally, yeah, it's a pretty big deal. Regionally, we've also have Congresswoman Deb Haaland from New Mexico, who was elected to Congress in 2018. So we have some movement of Native leadership within traditionally white halls of power. How can those relationships help Native tribes who have sovereignty pursue a conversation of reparations like this?
So I head back to Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. One of my strengths is telling our story. My background is I worked in the museum since I was like 8 years old when my dad was working on it, and would learn how to do tours and everything. And I would love to hear people's stories of what brought them there, and I would like to tell our story. And so a piece of that's the least glamorous part of my job, though people think it's really cool that I go back to DC and I meet these people and I go to all these fundraisers. But the best part is just telling the story. It's walking into that room feeling awkward. There's always that piece right before I walk in the room where it's like, there's something in there. There's that colonized piece in my head that says, you're not supposed to be here. You can't do this. And I walk right past that, and I can feel those ancestors with me. I can feel future generations being there, and that's part of my job, is to go into that space and do that. So if there's other people who are going to go and help make those steps, help amplify those voices, and recognizing that you have on this stage people that work on sovereignty in so many different ways here, and so many different ways to interact, and so many different ways that we can overlap and make this stronger. It's an incredible, I'm so excited to be up here with people who do this work, because it takes all of us to do that. Sovereignty is this amazing weaving of all of these things coming to life. And that includes allies. That includes people who help us do this. So.
I think opportunities like that also have given us an entrance into conversations and tables that we have not been at in the past. And so as Native people, we know decisions have always been made about us, around us, and not with us. And so by having representatives in these positions, it gives us a voice. And it's kind of one of those, when we talk about education and things, like, it's not that we're not still hunters and that we're not still traditional people, that we don't still have culture and we don't still have these pieces of us, but we have to use the tools that help us fight for our sovereignty. And so by being in these positions in Washington, D.C., and having representatives that do travel and do go speak for us, it allows us to be part of the decision making, and it allows us to be part of the decisions that are made about us, so that we actually, have a platform and a leg in the door to actually make decisions that are in the best interest of our people. And what we find out is the interest in our people is the best interest of all people. So when we talk about Mother Earth, yes. So when we talk about protecting Mother Earth, when we go back to those indigenous ways, those indigenous teachings, essentially we're saving every single person on Mother Earth. It's not just about us getting our rights back. It's not just about our sovereignty. It's about caring about the bigger picture. So those positions are extremely important, and you will continue to see more women and more Native people in those positions to allow these decisions to be made with us as part of that decision making. So.
Fern, in the story, you mentioned being open to financial reparations, but knowing several Natives who are not. Why do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Well, I guess by saying I was open to financial reparations, I mean, I wouldn't presume to decide what any tribal entity wanted or how they defined reparations. But as a Dakota person, So the Sioux Nation was offered a settlement in 1989 that at the time it was fairly small, it's in the millions, but now it's over $1 billion in trust. Because the Sioux people were like, no, we don't want that money. This was unceded land, the Black Hills. The Black Hills is our unceded land. It was never given away. We did not ever consent. Once again, that word consent. I loved Robin's point about how do you build a consent culture? Look to the Native people here. We'll show you how. I'm Dakota, so I'm from a matriarchy. I was raised by women. The women in my household ran things, as it should be. So where do I see in the future that I'm envisioning and hoping for is that it will, in fact, increasingly follow along an Indigenous template of female-led leadership that emphasizes that we are all connected, that nobody should be excluded. I know that's like a really simple idea, but it's at the heart of Indigenous thinking about the value of each person in a village. Everyone has a value. So I see a future led by Native women. I see a Seattle City Council led by a whole bunch of Deb Warres, where she's not the only Native person. But also I see a city council, a Seattle like budget and agenda set by tribes, set by tribal people. Who's better equipped and has the most experience for how to navigate traumatic, fast change? There are some changes coming this way. So I am Dakota, and I also believe because of that we are in a time of prophecy. I don't think you have to actually believe in that to see that there are changes coming. There are changes coming to us. How will humankind survive that? There are solutions already unfolding all around you. The first entities in Washington State to pay serious attention to climate change, tribes on the coast who are most affected. So there are just really shovel-ready pathways for supporting transformative change in America. And it's right in front of all of us. It's taking your treaties and supporting them. What could we not do?
Well, to kind of expound on some of Fern's points, and the points of the Black Hills too, it's not really reflected in a lot of your history books or language, but the Black Hills were just as important to the Cheyenne as it was also the Dakota peoples. I think on that point, and I've said it in other circles before, and it didn't come from me. I didn't make this up. It's a truth that has been expressed, and it's a truth that we know, and it's something that I'll pass on and pass through to you, to every single person in this room. Because you'll get the people that'll be like, well, they're not Native, or maybe they don't even know Native people, so like, what does that have to do with me? Kind of that whole American idealism, having everything in that linear hierarchy. Instead of like our indigenous societies where everything's circular based, how we support each other circularly, everything's connected. But I want to remind everyone here that it doesn't matter where you come from, you are indigenous to this planet, and you're indigenous to this earth. if your ancestors came from Africa or they came from Europe, they came from the islands, wherever they came from on this planet, you come from the original tribes of this earth. You go back far enough, you come from tribal people. And along the ways of mentioning monarchy and industrialization and the things that kind of got us to this point, the rise of America, so to speak, on the backs of slave labor and at the cost of native genocide. There were people that forgot that. They forgot that, detached, disconnected from themselves, disconnected from their spirits and who they are, their ancestors. Capitalism, everything's got a monetary value in that world. But we understand a different world differently that exists when all that fails. And it's so important for everyone to understand that simple concept, because when you understand that you're indigenous to this earth and this planet, you begin to see your relationship, because in our native cultures, everything's relationship based. Our relationship with our relatives, and not just human relatives. We have other relations out in the natural world. When you understand your relationship and your place in things, then you can begin to understand your responsibility to yourself. You can be connected with, in your spirit, with who you are, and be responsible to the earth, to Grandmother Earth, Mother Earth that supports us. You begin to see your place in everything and realize how the gravity and the impact of your choices that you make, and that responsibility, your responsibility to your neighbors, and how you treat them, how you consider them, how you look out after each other, So I think that's just a really important concept when we're talking about reparations or we're talking about moving forward. And yes, the answers lie within the tribal nations of this continent. We, despite, against all odds, we still have our cultures. We still have our languages. Some of them are hanging on by a thread, but we're also the leaders in the environmental issues that are going on in this climate change crisis that we're in. So I think the more that message spreads, the more that people in Seattle and elsewhere understand that very simple concept, you'll get it to where all of us will start working together better. And I just think that's so important to have that to every single person that's in this room. Look at yourself, look at where you come from, understand that about yourself. And when you can get back to indigenous-based values, then you'll see the world differently. You'll be able to take care of the earth that sustains us, and we'll be able to live in a good way with our neighbors, live in good relations. What's the primary rule, I guess you could say, being Dakota, being a good relative,
That's what it means. Dakota means good relative. Means good relative.
So with that, I just want to put that out there because I think it ties directly into what's been mentioned up here on this stage tonight.
Thank you. As we talked about kind of shifting our ideas of definitions, Marcus, I wanted to ask maybe how your idea of the definition of the word reparations shifted throughout reporting this piece.
I mean, it was definitely fluid, I guess. I would say it's less of the word reparations that shifted, and it was more of an internal shift. Like, I hadn't told too many people the story, but they paid $5 to be here. So, I remember for the longest time, I mean, my family, we did a, tracing back to our ancestry. We didn't do that cop-out 23andMe. We actually did the work in order to do it. And, finding that, my great-grandmother was raped by my great-grandfather, and my great-grandmother was full Cherokee. And, for the longest time, having shame around that. And in sitting and talking with the people on the stage and the people who I spoke with for the article, it made me look at it a little differently in terms of, the past and how we reflect upon it, and not just feeling guilt and shame over this past, but it providing instruction, right? In the sense that my grandfather and great-grandfather and the founders of the United States of America and so forth, they had the same thing that we have, that the same power that we have is called right now, right? And they chose to act in certain ways that have repercussions and consequences today. And so if we ourselves can act in a way that is much more constructive and in a positive light, and working towards a better world and a better, more equitable, just future, we can start here and right now, right? Because all the future is just an infinite succession of presents. And so for me, it gave me sort of hope, right? In this, conversation where it's like, well, where do we begin? Where do we start? Well, hell, start now, all right? And so I will say it made me, as a cynical journalist, it made me more hopeful about the future. Yeah.
And if I can jump in real quick, I just want to say thank you for sharing that story. I think most families have complex histories that we all need to sit with, and that we can do that work. We can do that work. I mean, I don't know, now to bring a pop culture reference into it, I saw Frozen 2, and it has some reparation pieces in there. They're going to destroy, sorry for the spoilers, but they're going to destroy this because their grandfather did something wrong. And I'm like, oh my gosh, did Disney actually do this? Is this the conversation? And it's they didn't quite go as far as I would have wanted them to go. But yes, let's go there and have those conversations when you see them with your kids. Let them know that, these are things that your family might have done in the past. This is how things change. And in tribes, in tribal communities, in the urban Indian community, we have this piece where nobody goes away. Nobody's getting kicked out of there. I've been part of school groups, non-native school groups, where it's if you didn't conform to how they were going to do this, then maybe this isn't a good fit for you. We don't have that. You don't want to have that either. The most authentic places you go are where you're accepted for exactly who you are. And we have to make difficult choices. We have to do, when Marcus said nuances, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is really big. Let's dive into that. We like to say embrace that gray area, because that's where life is. That's where connection is. That's where the soulful piece is. And there are things that you can do every single day to kind of help with that, to talk to your kids, to talk to each other, start those conversations. And, I think one of the things that I do want to make sure that I say at some point during this, so I'll just say it now, which is I have these really cool earrings on, and Rachel and Fern also have these amazing earrings on, and Abrielle's in the front row, and she has the amazing earrings that she makes herself. But one of the things I like to say when people compliment me on them, or the hashtag I use, is I paid full price for these. I paid full price from an Indigenous artist for these earrings. For this hat, I traded somebody for something that was valuable to them, that was as valuable to this. So I'm going to encourage you to look for people of color to pay full price for things for.
Support your Indigenous artists.
Yeah. Yes. Really, I want to wear that. And usually, I'm thinking of what else I have. Oh, I have these boots, and I got them at Macy's, and I got them for 60% off, which is what I love. I love getting a good deal. This is a good deal. Paying full price to an Indigenous artist doing this work is a really good deal. It's amazing. These are soul pieces. These are pieces that protect me, and they absorb difficult times for me. And I'm so thankful for that. So I'm going to encourage you to do some of those things. We also found out, we didn't know this, but we're getting honorariums for being here. Right? But we all showed up not knowing we were getting those, because this is the work we do. So there's always places where you can give money, you can give a gift. If you're inviting someone to speak in your child's classroom, please bring them a gift. We would definitely do that. So those little things that you can do to make those connections, that's really what it is, and show that respect.
We could all obviously talk all night, so I would love to open it up if anyone in the audience has questions. There are 2 mics on either side of the stage, and so we'll just jump right in. Please go ahead.
Yes. My name is Ilani Casey. I'm an enrolled tribal member of the Tlingit Nation, Raven Frog Clan, born and raised in Seattle. And I'm also the board chair of the Nakani Native Program in Seattle. It's a 501c3. And part of the reason why I wanted to speak or ask the question is this is really a phenomenal panel, and the information, I'm so glad it's being filmed. This is really valuable historical information that needs to be captured and then shared. And we received a grant recently from Stand Up to Oil. So that we can do more work and so I give workshops on how to be an ally to Indigenous people as well as the environment, right? So what I'd like to do is there anyone or is there any way this conversation, I'd like to call it Native Voices, continue and maybe do something like this quarterly or something like that this year? And so anyone here who's interested, I'd love to. Let's connect. Let's do this.
Are you organizing it?
Yes.
Woohoo! Right.
That's a great
So
idea.
who's interested? All right.
I'm interested.
So I would love all of your cards.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Lupe Barnes, Tewa, New Mexico, Azteca, Tula, and Tarahumara from Sierra Madre. This is a segue to my question. The Duwamish tribe, the people of the inside, the people of Chief Seattle, the first people of the city of Seattle, they have never left and they're still here. They have never left and they are in their ancestral homeland from 3 Tree Point, Puget Sound, 3 miles west of SeaTac, eastward to Cascade Mountains, along Sigo Bellevue Boulevard, South Center, northwest to 49th parallel, the Canadian border, westward to Puget Sound, southwest back to 3 Tree Point. They are still here. You are still on Duwamish land. 2 questions. We have Ken here from the Duwamish tribe. Why is he not up there? Recently, the young man, I think Donnie from the Muckleshoot, stood up at the Seattle School Board and indicated that the Duwamish should not be in the history taught to the students because they're not federally recognized. Why? 2 questions. Why isn't Ken up there, and why is the Muckleshoot saying that the Duwamish should not be, the history should not be taught in the Seattle public schools?
May I answer?
Yes.
So my apologies, I can't quite see you. Jolene and Cecile were invited, and
At the last minute.
I don't know when they were invited, but
At the last minute at our board meeting. Oh, I'm also a board member of the Duwamish Tribal Services.
awesome. Thank you for coming.
But they weren't invited till late.
I was just invited also, just like 2 or 3 days ago, I think. So I think it was we're excited that it got together. And
So my next question is, why is the Muckleshoot indicating that the Duwamish history should not be taught because they're not federally recognized?
You'll have to ask the Muckleshoot and the Duwamish tribal members. This is not an issue that non-natives can solve or intervene in. This is an issue of sovereignty, meaning that only sovereign native people can solve this issue. This is not an issue that non-natives can come along and strong-arm, because all of the people here are related. I'm from the Sistenwapitan Sioux tribe. My people originally from the Twin Cities. When settlers came along and we ended up being put on reservations, they scooped up everyone and they put us all on a reservation in South Dakota and said, now you're the Lake Traverse Sioux tribe. But we were 3 different Dakota bands. What I'm saying is that nuance of history is completely unknown to anybody. The only people who know any of the particulars of Dakota tribal history are Dakota people. So, there is, this is absolutely not a referendum on Duwamish tribal recognition. That is not what this event was conceived as. I know that. Yeah, thank you. And I really did hope that all people claiming Duwamish identity were here to be a part of the conversation, because once again, it's not about this fight right now. It's about like trying to imagine what it would be not to be embroiled in this toxic fight right now. Like, and you know what? As Native people, we never, ever get to do that. We're always trying to survive the crisis of today. We never get to just imagine playfully together. What are some positive things that we can imagine for ourselves?
And tribes don't always get along, I think, is one of the things. And we might get along on some things and we might sue each other on other things. This is what happens with governments. This is what happens with healthy governments, is that they recognize the places where we can work together and form strong coalitions while also still agreeing to disagree and having that piece of it. And I think that that's one of the fundamental pieces of sovereignty and a healthy government. That's what we want. We want to keep having those dialogues.
Well, I think part of it too is, again, this isn't a black and white conversation. There's a lot of complexities that come with this. My name is, I'm Rachel Heaton, and I am an enrolled Muckleshoot tribal member, but I'm also a descendant of Duwamish people. I can trace my family's lineage directly to the waterfront and the village of where my family was moved from. So we have Duwamish people within Muckleshoot tribe, within Tulalip tribe, within Suquamish, within all of these areas that you listed, because the history is really complex. But there are Duwamish people up on this stage that are being represented, and I am a Duwamish. My ancestors come from here, and so yes, I am enrolled Muckleshoot, but that's because of the history that played out in my family and the assimilation that took place within my family. So again, the complexity between each individual is individual history, but kind of forms a bigger picture of our Native people in this area. But I do think that we've done our best to do some representation of our areas up here, and I'm very pleased with the voices that are up here. And so, yes, I don't just claim Duwamish descendancy, but I am a Duwamish my ancestors are of Duwamish land, and I am a Muckleshoot tribal member. And so learn our history, learn our stories, because until you hear our individual stories, you don't really necessarily know why we're in certain places and why we were forced to be put in certain areas. So I think that's important to know too.
Can I say one last thing, and just that is simply that this, oh my gosh, this is just the first conversation that needs to happen.
And
there's
we were
so many
capped
things.
At this many people.
Yeah.
So.
There's so many things we're not going to get right. But like, if we are afraid of doing it, if we can't do it perfectly, we won't try at all. Like, when are we going to get started?
Much more conversation to be had. Let's.
Twagalapu, Tsi'ab, Equitlat Siab, Diishad, Justice Bill Teetstat, Buckleshoot Opshad, Gunachish, Kikla Ish Yuchat Duasat, Yathna Chatsati, Ducting Ton Chatsati, Hunakawu Ayachat. My name is Justice Bill. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, and I'm also Ducting Ton of the Tlingit Nation on my mom's side. And I'm not a politician But, the conversation that was just brought up, it deeply impacts our family. So before Cecile Hansen was the chairwoman of the Suquamish Indian tribe, my grandfather, Dr. Willard Bill Sr., was the chairman. And we're very proud in my family of our Suquamish heritage. We can trace back our ancestors to the Black River Valley, to Dzidzialich, to Little Herring House, to our chiefs and our headmen on Lake Washington. Most of my family comes from this area. Most of my ancestors don't come from the Green and White Rivers. My grandpa Stuckjack was the headman at the village of Stuck. And that was, just like a miles southeast of Three Tree Point. That's Scaleb in our language. And I don't come here to speak from a political place, right? Because that's not my job. I'm not on our tribal council. But I do want to share some of our history that I think in the conversation on acknowledging land and the conversation of recognition in this city has often forgotten. So when the Treaty of Point Elliott and the Treaty of Medicine Creek were being negotiated, none of our people were reserved a single acre of land. Our relatives, the Squalyopsh, were reserved 4,000 acres, but that land was not prime. You couldn't grow food, there wasn't fresh water, and it was essentially a death camp. The same was true for my Spoyalopopsh relatives. And so for many of Muckleshoot's ancestors, who are also Duquatch, who are also from this region, we didn't just get forced out of Seattle and moved onto that reservation. We engaged in active warfare with Governor Isaac Stevens and his militia. And without the work of our relatives to the east of the mountains, our Sahopton, our Klamath, our Yakima relatives, that wouldn't be a victory for our people. And you see in many of the history books that are written about that conflict that it says that nothing much was won for either side. But what I know that is true, especially because I've had the honor of working with my elder, Gilbert King George, on this project, is that without that conflict, the Muckleshoot Indian Reservation would not exist today. But after that conflict, 4,000 acres of reservation land was set aside for our people. See, our ancestors understood that settlement was not something that we could defeat head on, that it was something that we would have to survive until our people were strong enough again to conquer. Because the first act of resistance that any Indigenous person takes part in is by being alive, right? Because the federal government does not want that for us. And so when my ancestors moved to the reservation, they understood that that was the first step in making sure our people were alive. And it hurts me that my relatives from both sides, my Suquamish and Muckleshoot relatives, we're suffering through this lateral violence, and it's something that I hope one day we'll be able to work through. But it's also something that we have to work through in a place of respect on both sides, because there's statements on the other side that unfortunately are simply not true, right? So in an article that was linked by the South Seattle Emerald, it was published in the Washington Post on October 11th of 2019, it talks about, it was quoted Cecile, and it said, "They took all our land away and kicked us out of town, but we didn't leave. Just because you don't see us on some ugly reservation, we're still here." And those words of ugly reservation hurt my heart. Because, my dad grew up in Seattle, but he made the choice to raise us on that reservation. And my dad and my grandpa would be proud to say that our reservation isn't ugly. Our reservation has a state-of-the-art wellness center, a state-of-the-art behavioral health program, a state-of-the-art tribal school. Today, our people are the strongest they've been in 150 years, and that's something to be proud of. And we acknowledge that because we descend directly from the people within the city of Seattle, that it's our responsibility to get this story out there. And for a long time, that was not something we were in the space to do. But with my generation, I hope that it's a task that we can take on. All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Who's got the Kleenex?
We'll We'll do one more question here. How about from this side?
Okay. Ja just tids da hat the wabs. Akwaye, siatchan. And this simply means I am workman of the Duwamish tribe and great grandson of Chief Seattle. Hueyo yayu saslak yoate heko ala shak elbi. And that I don't work down at this big house down in Renton anymore, or Tukwila that builds airplanes. So I'm retired now. I'm retired from Boeing, flight operations engineering as a systems and data analyst. I'm a former Duwamish Tribal Council member, former president of Duwamish Tribal Services. And I'm honored and I'm proud to see so many people talking about so many things on stage here today. And for this gentleman that just spoke, my hands go up to you for speaking your words. Thanking my friend for his heart. And for your big words. But my question is really to the panel, it's really to Fern. Because what I heard her say was that she's trying to work through all of these negative things to get to a good spot. And I've had people for my entire life tell me, Ken, you're so negative, you're so negative. And I say, no, I'm not. I'm not negative. I'm just working through all the bad things because I know that at the end of it will be nothing but good. And so I would like you, if you will, address this. And I wrote it down as intergenerational trauma. How do you work through that in the form of this, the context of this meeting here today, reparations? So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Hello? Oh, sorry. Thank you for that question. And just, I'm so moved right now. I'm just so moved to feel like this is a space where people can come together and speak from their hearts. Just all my respect. Honestly, Ken, I don't believe that reparations can address the kind of deep trauma that is really woven into our DNA at this point. I was just describing to Jake from Bitterroot before we came out here about all of the kind of new knowledge around epigenetics that is coming out that talks about how stresses that we're exposed to in one generation literally become a part of our personality almost and get passed on from generation to generation. That's true. We know that's true. I have to believe, and this is where my faith comes from, that we can do the opposite, that we can heal, regenerate, and transform ourselves right now and pass that forward too. I don't have all the answers. I'm just looking. But I do know that you just pointed, you really touched on something there about we can't ignore our pain. We can't ignore our pain. And in a certain way, we can't think our way through this time right now. We kind of have to let ourselves feel it. We have to let ourselves feel. We're all so disconnected from one another because that's what capitalism does. That's what capitalism does. The Lower Alwa tribe have been the first tribal nation to bring down a dam here in the Northwest. When that river is liberated and the salmon can come upstream, the people are fully Lower Alwa again. There is another kind of dam that has been placed over the spirits of Native people. When my 4 generations of parents were all removed to boarding schools, there was a literal loss of the experience, the skills, the emotional connection, the history. There's so much that goes into a family relationship that is now gone. So for me, reparations, well, how about free medical care, free therapy, no taxes as a small, small start for all Native people. But yes, we want our land back. But here's the other thing, and I think that Rachel touched on it when she mentioned that tribal sovereignty lifts all boats. The benefits that are fought for and achieved by Native peoples are things that are good for all of us. Those are things that are good for all of us.
Thank you, Fern. All right, we started out tonight talking a bit about land acknowledgements, and I wanted to invite Robin and Rachel to close tonight with a land acknowledgement.
All right, so we were talking at the beginning about backstage, like who's going to do the land acknowledgement, and then they said, you know, Town Hall does a land acknowledgement, and we thought that something that might be a little bit different and might actually be, let's see, maybe a little stronger is if we waited until the end, after we've had this conversation, as we've made these connections within the room, that we can really acknowledge the place that we want to stand. And I'm actually going to ask those who are able to please stand with us. And before we do the land acknowledgement, I'd like to take a moment of silence for the shootings that happened today. That's something that triggers all of us, and in terms of safety, and it's definitely something we can come together on. So if we can just take a minute to do a couple big breaths and think about those families that have been affected by that. So. Well, thank you so much for coming together on this land that our people have been here. Since time immemorial, Coast Salish people have been here where you're standing, and we continue to come here. We continue to be here. We want to be here, and we are here, and we want to be here with friends. We want to be good neighbors. We want to have these moments together, these moments that feel connection, the moments that aren't always the most pleasant, because we want to have real, authentic conversations. We want that nuance, and that's what standing on this land is. Since time immemorial, difficult conversations have been had here. Celebrations have been had here. People have born, people have died, people have loved, people have gotten married. Children have come into this. This is the world you stand on. This is the land you stand on. We are here. We haven't left. We're still here. And aren't you so lucky to get to be right here? And can't we do this together?
And I just want to say, you know, that let's think about the land that we're on, not just the concrete buildings, these sidewalks. Think about the medicines that reside on these lands, the air, the villages that used to be here, the children and families that used to gather on these waterfronts and survive and live and thrive. Those very people are still here, and they're still thriving, and we're fighting. And we're fighting for a better life for all of us, for every one of us, to make sure that we can still fish in our waters, to make sure that we still have clean air to breathe, to stop this corporate greed and capitalism that continues to take place on our lands and strip Mother Earth of the things that we truly need to connect. We can't connect through all of this concrete. We have to have trees. We have to have our grass. We have to have our water. And all of those things were here. And it was thriving and it was healthy. And we have to work towards back that healthiness. So when we acknowledge the land, we have to acknowledge the way that this land was before we were here. And we have to acknowledge that the ancestors of those very people are still here and trying to keep this city a beautiful place and to maintain the culture and the languages. So when you think about the people of this land, think of the treaties. Think of the things that had to happen over time for this city to come together. You know, by 1900, 3/4 of us were in residential schools. And so we weren't able to thrive and to continue to grow in the way that we should. But because we're growing and because we are strong and because we have voices and we're using them, think about where we are and really think about any land that you step on. It doesn't matter if you're in Seattle, anywhere you're at, think about the people that were there and think about the land that you're on, because Mother Earth has everything that we need, but she doesn't need us. And so we need to think about what is our part here and what part do we want to play here. So I want to acknowledge the Native people that have thrived on this land. I want to acknowledge our Duwamish, our Muckleshoot, our Suquamish, our Tulalip, our Snoqualmie, our Puyallup, Nisqually, and any of the other tribes I didn't mention. You know, we have to think about, there's so many that have touched this land. And so I'm just thankful that each one of you are in here to hear this conversation, to start a conversation, and to know that we have work to do and to move forward. But until we truly acknowledge the land, and that doesn't just say where you're at, truly think about it and understand the history and be a part of what history is going to be and be on the good side and what's going to be better for our future generations. That's truly acknowledging land. And so thank you for each one of you that came here to hear our voices and to just take a little bit of something home with you. And thank you for your words. Justice, you as a youth, you guys are our future generations, and you are the reasons, you know, that we do the work that we do, and we have to continue to fight and to, you know, correct history and to have STI, you know, curriculum in our schools and all of those things. So when we talk about land acknowledgement, or if it's something you choose to do into your community or into your business or your life, think it's really a lot bigger than just naming the tribe of where you're at. It's deeper than that. So thank you for everything that you gave this evening.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Fern. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you all for being here.
Oh, thank you.